Hello, food enthusiasts, and welcome to another episode of Future Foodcast. We are so excited you're with us. Today, we have Nick Hazell with us. He is the founder and CEO of V2 Food. They are the #1 Australian producer of plant-based meat products. We are very excited to hear some of his insights. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Lovely to be here, Pam.
Yeah, we're glad that you've made time on your schedule for us. I know you're very busy as CEO. One of the things that I noticed about your company is you are very intentional. Tell us about your mission.
Yeah, we are. We're very much a mission-driven company. We've taken a look at this plant-based meat opportunity, and this is about 3.5 years ago. I was asked to lead a startup by the CSIRO in Australia, which is Australia's sort of science agency, if you like. And I was looking at framing up, well, what is the problem to be solved? And I was in San Francisco at a conference, feeling rather uncomfortable. Maybe it was jet lag, but actually I put my finger on what the problem was. I was the only non-vegan out of like 150 CEOs of alt protein companies. And why is that important? I think it's because if you frame the problem that the world doesn't have enough vegans, then you do all sorts of things, like you attack the meat industry and you focus on rich vegans effectively. Whereas from my perspective, I was saying, well, actually the problem is that we cannot feed the planet if we carry on eating meat the way we're doing it. You know, meat is incredibly inefficient. And if you just look at the correlation between wealth and meat consumption, you just join the dots, you realize that we run out of land. And it's not just like in my lifetime, we're going to be running out of land within the next decades or so. All land, we already have 70% of the world is farmed, and the vast majority of that is for the animals that we like to eat. So we frame the problem as how do we make meat for everybody to reduce our reliance on animals for our feed, and therefore stop this insane destruction of the planet around us. It's probably, I always think that of all the sustainability opportunities, you know, everyone goes to renewable energy, etc., but actually agriculture and meat is probably the biggest thing that we can do. So that was kind of framed up V2. And then I'm an engineer. So then you break down the problem into what are the technology aspects that we need to solve? What's the business model that we need to solve? Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I go to the supermarket, maybe not now because I probably eat a lot less meat than I did 3 years ago. But the most expensive part of my grocery bill was meat. So there's no way that I would pay more for meat if it was plant-based. You know, you just don't do that. So the three things that we had to solve were how do we make it affordable, i.e. the same price or cheaper than meat? How do we make it truly delicious? I will not sacrifice taste on food ever. I'll always go for stuff that tastes good. So how do we make it more delicious? And then how do we make it available, you know, in the place that you buy your meat? And if you buy your meat in the US, it'll be, you know, at a Walmart or a Kroger's. If it's in Australia, it'll be a Coles or a Woolworths, or you buy it at a Burger King or a Hungry Jack's in Australia. And if you're in Africa, you'll probably buy it in a wet market, and it'll be a completely different market. So our job is to solve the problem of meat in a way that's accessible for the masses. And that's what we started doing. And in Australia, we've gone from obviously we didn't exist 3 years ago to the leading brand in Australia. We doubled the category last year, and I think we're now about 22% of the category. And from my perspective, it's great, but it's not great because we're only like 1% of meat. When we get to 10% of meat, well, not even that. I mean, we just need to keep going. So thanks for the congratulations, but it doesn't feel like we're ready for congratulations yet.
Well, like a true entrepreneur, you're never happy with where you are right now, but let's unpack some of that. You mentioned several really critical things. And the first one was that you're redefining the problem a little bit. Rather than bashing what's going on right now, you're solving for some future thinking problems rather than looking in the past. And I think that consumers more and more are very interested in sustainability of our food supply and how are we going to feed the people as the populations grow, because you're exactly right, the numbers don't add up, and that's the big #1 problem. But another one that keeps people from trying plant-based meat or alternatives to meat is the taste issue, which you hit head on. So you're not going to sacrifice that. And I love your engineering background. So you sat back. It's only been 3 years, Nick, and you've done really quite a bit. But where did you even, how do you even start to solve for this? what was the first thing you did? How do you even start to
Well,
figure it
the
out?
first thing was I've spent most of my career developing food products. I worked for PepsiCo. We delivered the most premium chips in Australia and invented a brand, Red Rock Deli, but it's all about taste. So actually, the first thing I did when I took the job, if you like, was just to eat meat and just deconstruct it, because you never really think about it. It's just something you do every day. You don't really think about what is this meat that you're eating. And so I ate quite a lot of burgers, and I was seeking out the best meat that I could find, and burgers, and then try and figure out what is that flavor experience that I'm getting. And obviously I'm working with some of the top meat scientists in the world that work for the CSIRO, and together we sort of deconstruct what that eating experience is, and then you try and reproduce that with ingredients which are plant-based. So we're not meat. We don't. It's actually sort of you can't reproduce directly, because obviously we're made from plants, but you can reproduce the experience. And then of course, then you realize that we're not actually constrained by the genetics of a cow. We could actually make our meat more delicious. So that was the problem deconstructed. And we had a very clear goal initially, was to create a Whopper. So we started working with the Hungry Jacks, which is Burger King in Australia, and focused on, okay, how do we deliver a Whopper that actually was indistinguishable from the meat Whopper? So very clear goal. But at the same time, while I was doing that, I was realizing and thinking, well, the world isn't going to be saved by us eating more Whoppers. How do we do mince, for example, which is a very big part of the meat industry? So we were doing side experiments on mince, and then we were thinking, well, okay, beef is really interesting. What about pork? The biggest meat-eating nation in the world is China, and they eat a lot more pork than they eat beef. Can we apply our flavor science to pork? So we did that in parallel. So it's kind of grown up, sort of lots of projects in parallel. And at one point, I counted 38 technology and science projects that we're running in parallel, and what's different about how we've done it, and the reason we can do it so quickly, is we haven't got some monolithic R&D division with hundreds of people. I've only got 12 people now in R&D, and initially it was just me, but we use this incredible science capability that there is in Australia. Australia has one of the best academic reputations in the world, but they also have the worst translation reputation. So they have these amazing scientists, but what they do doesn't actually get translated into businesses and impact. We never had a very advanced sort of venture capital system in Australia. So kind of part of our job was to engage with all of these scientists and draw out their knowledge and work with them on the bench. And the only thing we said is that we don't want you sitting on the information and writing a paper in 6 months' time. We want it today, even before you're sure that you know exactly what the results are. We want them so we can use them. Yeah, it's a completely different model of innovation. I've spent most of my career working with universities and was kind of frustrated at how slow it was. And then you kind of realize that it wasn't that the scientists were slow, it was just the process, because they have to check everything, write a paper. They know that they're going to be peer reviewed. So they have to be really careful with everything they say. And that just slows the whole thing down.
Let's not pass over that, because that in itself, a really new look at how to innovate, because what slows companies down, like you were saying, is the capital intensive front end research that has to be done in whatever you're going to do. So the fact that you were able to leverage already equipped scientists who know the scientific process and give them a project to work on, and then, don't wait 6 months or a year for this whole process of publishing your paper and the whole peer reviewed. We want the information so that we can go to work on a business case to make this an actionable product. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's exactly it.
I was getting excited while you were talking.
Yeah, the scientific process is wonderful. I mean, science is about trying to find truth. That's what it is. And it's very, the checks and balances in the process are wonderful. It really does mean that you are much more likely at finding the truth if you follow the scientific process. But those checks and balances make it slow. And I can remember when I was at Mars, I was R&D director for Mars, and this was about more than 15 years ago. The Mars family wanted to know what should they be doing on sustainability and climate change. And I organized a conference in Australia with the top climate scientists. A lot of them were Australian. At the time, Australia was leading the way. It's kind of lost its way a little bit now in terms of sustainability. But from a science perspective, we assembled them, and then the scientists were going to give a normal talks. And I said to them, we're not interested. This is a friendly environment. We're not going to critique your science. talk to us about what you really believe and not caveat it with lots of, statistics and 99% certainty and 80%. Just tell us what you're telling your children based on the science you've got. And they laid it absolutely out with the climate change impacts that we're seeing today, completely known. All the scientists have been publishing this for 30 years, but they laid it out absolutely clearly. This is what you should be doing. And Mars, to their credit, developed a strategy sustainable in a generation, which became the Mars sustainability strategy. So get scientists to tell you what they know in a format which isn't necessarily a paper, and you can actually go a lot faster. Our scientists all write papers as well, but we say you do that on your time, not on our time.
That's right. That's right, because you want to be able to have the information so you could go to work on that. I think that's genius, Nick. One of the most interesting things I've heard in a long time. I had never thought about approaching innovation that way, because typically entrepreneurs are very internal in how they're looking, and it's all about their little piece of the ground and what are we doing here, not looking outside of what's happening in parallel with what we're looking to do and what other knowledge is out there that we can put together to move forward.
The problem is so multifaceted. I mean, we're doing projects in nutrition, because if I'm going to take meat off the plate, I better replace it with something that's as nutritious. And there's lots of opportunities there. And also, I mean, look, what's our biggest problem in the Western world? It's we don't eat enough plants and we don't eat enough fiber. So there's an opportunity to actually do something about it. There's sustainability. How do we get to carbon zero? And so soil systems, carbon sequestration, plant breeding, this is something that there's no way that anybody, we have to engage with so many different scientists to solve this problem. So I can't imagine there's any other way of doing it, to be honest. We could wait a decade before we've built up the R&D resources to do it if we did it ourselves. And solving sustainability slowly is not solving sustainability. There is a clock ticking. If we haven't cracked this in the next 5 to 10 years, it's, we would have reached all the tipping points. So this idea of urgency infuses our organization. We are so impatient to solve this as quickly as we possibly can.
Right. And I think in your area, especially with plant-based alternatives, especially to meat, because of the other negatives that are associated with that source of food, a lot of people talk about it as a trend. But I think that's probably not correct based on what you're saying.
No, it's a movement, I think. I mean, we said right at the very beginning, chief marketeer, and he comes from FMCG, and he's sort of doing the normal FMCG sort of marketing. And I'm saying, well, we want to, obviously marketing knows how to get consumers over the line, and there are some skill sets which are really valuable, but actually we're trying to create a movement. That's different from just FMCG marketing. A very, very different way of doing it. It does mean that we're very public, we're getting out there, we're talking a lot, and people are beginning to listen. So hopefully we can get mass adoption. As I say, solving this in a decade or two, building a food business in the traditional speed of building a food business isn't going to cut it. We've got to go a lot faster.
Yes, you have some urgency there. We have a very wide and varied audience. What is FMCG? If you would define that.
Sorry, sorry, that's fast moving consumer goods. It's kind of like all of the food businesses, the Mars and the Nestle's, and actually a lot of, other goods that you buy in the supermarket. But it's basically, stuff that you buy every day. And don't even think about most of the stuff. You go into a supermarket, you go with your trolley, you buy your stuff and you feed your family. That's something different than when you make a purchase, which you really think about. So buying a Tesla is a very different action than buying a 500-gram pack of mints in your supermarket. But interestingly, and there's an interesting comparison there, we were just doing the maths on carbon footprint. If you swapped out a 500-gram pack of mints, V2 mints, for your beef mints, you do that once a week, and you cook your spaghetti bolognese or chili con carne, or chili conch as you call it in Australia. You do that once a week, and that's the equivalent of running a family car for a year. So it's a lot cheaper than buying a Tesla.
It is a lot cheaper. And mince, for our worldwide audience too, is also known as like ground meat. So in some places, ground beef or ground pork or whatever that might be akin to. And I think beef was your initially
beef, because we were focused on the Whopper, but we're now doing pork, chicken. We've just launched. I've developed lamb. I've even developed goat. which we haven't launched
Yeah.
yet. But if you're serious about developing markets, you better have goat in your portfolio.
Yeah, and everybody's interested in the variety too, and especially if it's going to taste good. I really want to focus on your reason for being. I think you've done a better job than most of articulating what the problem is in a way that puts urgency on it. I hear about sustainability. We hear about it all the time because a lot of companies are talking about it. They're trying to figure out how to do better at it, but you're actually quantifying and putting the urgency on it with numbers and what we need to do, and that we need to make an impact pretty soon.
Yeah, it's a V2 is actually, we call it V2 because it's version 2 of the food system. And so that was the thinking behind V2. It's like, we've got to rethink the food system, and the food system should be a massive contributor to our sustainability on the planet. There are going to be 10 billion people. There's nothing we can really do about that. And of course, and we have to live within the planetary boundaries. I mean, there is no other way that we can exist. So, and the food system is a fundamental part of that. But we've kind of lost our way. There's been some choices that we made over our history around how we grow our food and how we feed ourselves, which are absolutely not optimal. So we need to rethink the food system, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's not just the plant-based meat, though that's an really important part of it. It's actually, well, how do we grow the plants? So again, we've had the green revolution, but it's been really input focused. A lot of fertilizer, a lot of pesticides, a lot of destruction of soil systems, a lot of destruction of natural capital. There is a better way of doing it, and not a going back to the 19th century way of doing it. No, use the science, because there is a lot of really great science to create a food system which is equitable and which is sustainable. And we're leaning into that. So not only are we making plant-based meat, but we're looking at the breeding of soy. Obviously, we don't use, we use soy as our main ingredient, and there are high protein soys out there. There are high protein and low flavor soys out there. The last thing I want is for my product to taste of soy. I've spent my life in the food industry trying to avoid things that have an off taste. So why would we go there? So there's some fundamental technology problems that need to be solved. And the good news is we can solve them. And then the question is can we solve them quick enough? So that's what we're leaning into. And I mean, from my perspective, as I say, I'm an R&D director who's now a CEO. I have a lot of remit and investors who are really interested in trying to solve these problems, because it's got to be solved. I mean, I don't believe that anybody thinks that this is not going to happen. It's really just a question of who's going to make it happen and can they do it fast enough.
And when I started out the podcast talking about one of the things I like about your company is that you're very intentional. The V2 that you just brought up, just saying this is version 2 of our food. Version 1 is on the way down the hill. I mean, they've gone off the curve, and they're not gonna make it. And so we've got to create a version 2. And I just love that, because every time you say the name, you think about that. Okay, this is a new way of approaching our food and how we eat and how we grow. What is a better way? I mean, other than finding maybe some richer sources of protein in the plant kingdom, is there an actual thought about technology around growing the plants? Like, are you using the land that we currently have, or are you doing something, inside, or what?
Yeah. No, for sure. So I'm number one, when you make meat from plants, we are 20 times more efficient. So if you take a kilo of soy, I can make 2 kilos of meat broadly. Okay. If I take that same kilo of soy and feed it to it, I'm going to make 100 grams of meat. So I am 20 times more efficient. That means 20 times less land, 20 times less water, 20 times less input. So even doing nothing, that's a really good start, because we've run out of land to grow our feedstock crops. And the average farmer is a feedstock farmer. Most of what we do is creating feedstock. But then you look about, well, how do you grow it? Soy and legumes, they are naturally restorative in as much as they take up nitrogen, they fertilize the soils. They're a great rotation crop, so it's a really good start. And we're working with another startup in Australia which is looking at maximizing the amount of carbon you can sequester when you grow the crop. And in fact, we're working with like 4 other startups in different areas. So very collaborative, but this is one that excites me the most, because we've done trials now on soy where we're putting in more than 5 tons, actually between 5 and 8 tons of carbon per hectare when we grow our soy of carbon. And you do the maths on that, it makes our soy carbon negative. In fact, when we put it all together, our product, which is now 2.5 kilos of carbon per kilo of meat, we think we can get down to zero. So we've got a roadmap to zero. It's going to take 4 years because we have to actually convert a whole lot of farmers to growing this soy, and it's going to take 2 or 3 years to do it. And we also have to extract the protein from the soy, so that's a big endeavor,
a process.
But actually, on paper, we can solve this thing. We can actually eat food that's carbon negative, carbon positive. I'm not sure which way to put it, but it's actually good for the world rather than bad for the world.
We're not adding more.
We're actually sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it into the ground. And there's only 3 places you can have carbon. It's sort of in the ground, in the oceans, or in the air. And we don't want so much in the air, so let's put it either in the ground or in the ocean. So so that's actually a food system which you want for the future. Super exciting. And then in parallel with that, actually have soy that doesn't have any flavor, which, to be honest, I think everyone in this industry needs raw materials which are cheap, sustainable, carbon negative, and no flavor, because you don't want to, if you're going to make meat, you don't want it to taste of soy or pea or whatever you use, wheat, fava bean.
Whatever it is. So that frees you up to then put in the flavor profile that you want to put in, depending on what you're trying to duplicate. And I feel like moving forward in the future, as more and more people move away from meat, even if they might still eat a little bit of meat, they're eating less meat. And when there are good alternatives, people are more likely to try it when they think, like you were saying, the taste profile and everything.
And also if they can afford it and it's available. We sort of say delicious, affordable, and available where you buy your meat.
All those things.
I reckon we can't do it on a podcast, but if I was to do a survey of your audience, I always ask, how many vegans in the audience? And you might get a few more than on average, but it's always going to be sort of 1 or 2%. But then we sort of say, well, how many people have tried to be a vegan or a vegetarian in their lives? And then you always get, I did it last night. I was giving a talk to a confectionery industry in Australia. And sure enough, 20 to 30% of people who've tried to be a vegan or vegetarian, but gave up because it's just too hard. And then you say, well, how many people are reducing their meat intake? It's always between 50 and 70%. Even when I talk to the meat industry, they're reducing their meat intake. So making it easier for people to reduce their meat intake is the job to be done.
Yeah. Well, Nick, do you think, and this is what I was about to talk about, future looking right now, kind of more on the front end of this industry with the plant-based meats, we're trying to duplicate what we already know out of the meat kingdom. I just see a whole new category of foods where we're not going to try to be making it taste like beef or having it taste like pork, where we're going to be creating new taste profiles. Do you agree?
You know what? I don't actually.
No.
Okay. I grew up, in the
throwing it out there.
I'm old enough to remember when people were telling me I was going to be eating space food, because of all of this space food with the Apollo mission and everything's going to be changed. And then I look at what I eat, and I eat what my mum ate and what she cooked. And what can I cook? Well, I cook the same dishes that my mum and my grandmum cooked. And I've been thinking about this, and we're driven by our genes, so why do we like meat? Well, actually, because we're genetically wired to like meat. There's a nutritional payoff for us, in our evolution. But there was another genetic trait that we have, and that's conservatism for food. And it's probably stood us in good stead. We copy what our parents taught us, because probably it would mean that we wouldn't poison ourselves, and we'll learn about diets and stuff. So we're actually genetically conservative when it comes to food. And when I've done innovation for food companies, it was always a frustration, because we're saying, okay, we're going to come up with this wonderful new flavor, and then you talk to the consumers and they say, well, just give me steak and chips, or just give me something. And their comfort food is always stuff that they learned to eat as a kid from their parents and grandparents. So to be honest, we may be eating space food in a generation's time or 2 generations' time, but we can't wait. So today we eat what we eat. My job is to make sure that the meat that you eat is sourced in a sustainable way that's consistent with the boundaries, and don't change anything else. And then I could be fast, because we're not going to be changing our dietary habits in the next 10 years.
Yeah. You know what? That's a point well taken. I think the whole comfort food idea and what is you always go back to that, don't you? And from what you learned when you were growing up. You mentioned also nutritionally earlier on about if you're going to have plant-based meat, that you need to be looking at some of the nutrition there to make sure, especially with the proteins and amino acids and all of that. Can you speak a little bit to that and what you might be doing there to?
Yeah, no, it's really, it's kind of fundamental. That one of the first projects we did, apart from the developing all of the chemistry, etc., behind making it was a question to this, again, to the CSIRO, who are the primary sort of nutrition experts in Australia. And the question was what should our nutrition be? And so they basically looked at what people eat in Australia, what do they get from meat, which is a really important part of their diet. And then they recommended some adjustments to our formulation to make sure that we deliver all of the things that people need from meat. Because the last thing we want to do is, if we're going to take meat off the plate and replace it with plant-based meat, there must be no nutritional disadvantage. And hopefully there's something better. We actually can formulate so we're better. So that means that we fortify, there's B12 in there, there's zinc, there's iron in our product. We're looking at protein bioavailability. Traditionally, plant proteins are not as bioavailable as meat. Meat is wonderfully bioavailable. We're pretty good, actually. Some of our processing improves bioavailability, but we're working on how do we make our protein more bioavailable, and facing into the problems. Iron is a big problem. Anemia is in some societies is a huge problem. So making sure that our iron is bioavailable is another research project we're working on. So all of the opportunities and problems we're facing into, because we want to be more nutritious than meat. Good news is there are actually some benefits of being from plants, like fiber. So we've already shown that we're very nourishing to the microbiome, which is good. And we also seem to be quite satiating. One of the advantages of having fiber is that you actually, you get the right feedback signals from your gut biome to your brain, which says you're full. If you've ever eaten at a fast food joint, sometimes you eat a big burger and then 10 minutes later, you kind of want another one. and
Yes,
it's because we haven't triggered the natural sort of satiation mechanism we have in our bodies, because we're feeding stuff that just gets digested too quickly. So luckily we're on the right side of that. So it does mean that actually you probably will eat less calories if you switch to plant-based meat, which is a wonderful outcome. Serendipitous, but well, I don't know.
But that's true, because obesity is an epidemic, at least in some countries. In other countries, not as much. But
well, some countries you've got both starvation and obesity in the same country. It's really, there's 2 billion people obese and there's 2 billion people who are malnourished. And sometimes they're in the same countries. So we have to, and that's an environmental thing. Our food system is giving us food that's available, high in calories, but we've lost the mechanism for self-regulation when it comes to calories. Yeah. And that's something that we need to change as well. And I think plant-based meat actually does have a role in that problem.
Yeah, I think those all sound like good benefits, because there are a lot of benefits. I'm glad you turned it from my question to, some of the benefits of plant-based meats. We have talked about several really cool things and branding and the mission that you're on and what's happening with our food supply moving forward. What else would you like for our audience to know about, Nick, that we haven't covered thus far? Anything?
Look, the way I look at it is that, we could say, well, like, you've got to switch, you've got to take in your own hands the problems of the world and be more sustainable. In a way, I don't actually buy that. I think it's our job, it's the company's job, it's the people in the food industry's job to make it easy for people who have busy lives. They're running a family, they're trying to make ends meet. Our job is to put choices in front of them that actually are responsible and will help save the planet. So I don't think it's right for me to tell people, change because it's your problem. It's actually a societal problem. And I think companies and startups have a duty to actually be positive, to actually contribute to society. So I don't actually want to lay it on consumers. What I would say is that not all plant-based meat is the same. And if you've rejected the category because maybe 2 or 3 years ago you tried something and it wasn't very good, well, I'm not surprised, because there were some pretty terrible products out there. But the good news is we're getting better and better. We're not limited by the genetics of a cow. We can get better and better. It's a new movement. So give it another go, because, I know that the product I've got now today in the supermarket is much better than the product that I launched 2 years ago, because we're continually improving it. So maybe give it another chance. would be my ask, and then it's up to us to make sure it's delicious and affordable.
Well, I think that's a good word. I remember years and years ago, I tried some early protein bars that were, I'm into health and fitness and hiking and all that. So you're out in the middle of somewhere and you don't really have fresh food necessarily. You have like a protein bar. Really, the early protein bars tasted like cardboard, Nick, to your point. So I left them for a while, but then I came back and we have innovated in all these years. And now there's some really good alternative products on the market. And so to all of our listeners, yes, do give it another try if you haven't done that so far. Well, what does the future look like for V2 Food? You're in Australia right now, New Zealand.
Yeah, we're I mean, obviously Australia's only got 25 million people, so we're not going to solve the problem well, we'll solve it for the Australian population, but we need to get to the large population. So we're already in China. We've just launched a steam buns, a pilot trial in China, steam buns with 4,000 restaurants. That's what a pilot trial looks like in China.
Okay.
Their meat consumption has gone from 10 kilos per person to 60 in the last 30 years, and Hong Kong has 130. So if we don't fix China soon, we are in deep trouble. So we're in China.
And they have large numbers of people as well. I mean, that population is very large compared to other countries.
Yeah, 1.3 billion people it'll be. So for us, that's a priority. The rest of Asia, so we're very focused on Korea and Japan and the rest of Asia. And I'm looking at other markets as well. So we will go into other markets. But for us, we're looking at where is the biggest growth in meat consumption, and we're focusing on that. In a way, you could kind of say, well, we shouldn't be focusing on vegans, because in a way, vegans have already solved the problem. So focusing on rich vegans is probably not where we are. We're focusing on people who eat meat and want to eat meat, but are maybe thinking about an alternative. And our job is to provide that alternative so that we can sort of stop the growth of animal meat production.
And that's where you can have the biggest impact, to your point from before, of making the change and giving good alternatives. Who are the people that are looking for alternatives? They're not the people that are already vegan, like you said. They're the meat eaters. And if the meat eating has gone up by so many hundreds of percent, I mean, that's multiple times recently, that is a great place to start. I'm really glad that somebody with your foresight, and obviously you have a great team, you have a very innovative mind to look at what other knowledge is out there. And you're also collaborating with other people that are complementary to what you're trying to do. And I think all those are really positives. I appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom with us today on the Future Foodcast, Nick. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.